Hello. Wait, hello? Hello, hello? Okay. Welcome back to Down the Rabbit Hole. Today we're going all the way to Arkansas. And we're going to be talking about this tiny town called Elaine, Arkansas. And what happened here in 1919. If you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also subscribe. Please help a girl out. But so here's the thing about Elaine, Arkansas. It is one of those tiny towns would nonetheless play a big role in revealing the systematic issues that plagues America. And even now, the population is less than 700. And it is easy to imagine how small and deceptively sleepy it must have seemed in 1919 before this became a site of the worst actual racial conflict in U.S. history. The Elaine Massacre in 1919 and dozens of sites across the U.S. saw racial violence during what came known as the Red Summer. And the most violent of these incidents was the massacre in Elaine, which claimed the lives of an estimated 100 to 240 local African American farmers. And the attacks were carried out by a combination of local white mobs, such as the KKK, and federal soldiers. Immediately following the incident, the Elaine Massacre, uh, the Arkansas state government began to cover it up. Though luckily, the truth eventually found its way out, and the town became permanently scarred by this reputation. Um, but it's also important to know that the Elaine Massacre is by far the deadliest racial confrontation in all of Arkansas history, and possibly the bloodiest racial conflict in history of the U.S. While its deep roots lay in the state's commitment to white supremacy, the events in and around Elaine stemmed from the tense race relations with concerns about local labor unions and a shooting incident that occurred at a meeting place at the Progressive Farmers and Household Unions, escalated into a mob violence and part of the white people in Elaine and the surrounding areas. Although the exact number is unknown, estimates of the number of the African American communities were killed by whites and ranged in the hundreds. 5 white people lost their lives. Now, the conflict will begin on the night of September 30th, 1919. While approximately 100 African Americans, mostly sharecroppers, on the plantation of the white landowners attended a meeting in the Progressive Farmers in the Household Union America at a church on Hoop Spur, 3 miles north of Elaine. The purpose of the meeting of several of the black sharecroppers in the Elaine area was during the previous months was to obtain better payment for their cotton crops from the white plantation owners who dominated the area during the Jim Crow era. It is important to know that Jim Crow era was a very dark history in the U.S. And black sharecroppers were also exploited in their efforts to collect payment for their cotton crops. And the union had contracted with lawyer Ulysses S. Bratton, whose son Ulcer was at the meeting. Now, in previous months, there have been racial conflict in numerous cities in America, including D.C., Chicago, Knoxville, Indianapolis, with labor conflicts escalating throughout the country at the end of World War I. Government and businesses incorporated demands of the labor increasingly at the work of foreign ideologies such as Bolshevism and the threat of the foundation of the American economy. Thrown into the highly combustible mix that will return to the U.S. as black soldiers who were often exhibited in less submissive attitudes within the Jim Crow society around them. Now, unions such as the Progressive Farmers represented a threat not only to the tenet of white supremacy, but also to the basic concepts of capitalism. Although the U.S. was on the winning side of World War I, supporters of American capitalism found in communism a new menace to their security. Now, with the success of the Russian Revolution stopping the spread of the international communism, was seen as a duty to loyal Americans. And Arkansas Governor Charles Hillman Bro told a St. Louis, Missouri audience during the war that there existed no twilight zone in the American patriotism. With and called Wisconsin Senator Robert La Follette, who opposed the war, a Bolshevik leader. And during the Red Scare, the threat of the Bolshevism seemed to be everywhere, and not only in the labor strikes led to the radical industrial workers, but also in the world of the cotton fields in Arkansas. Now, leaders of the Hoop Union also had armed guards and around the church to prevent the disruption of their meeting, gathering their opponents through several accounts who fired shots at the sharp conflict. And the shootout would happen in front of the church on that fateful night. Between the armed black guards and the church with three individuals whose vehicles came was parked in the church, resulting in the death of W.A. Ackman, who was a white security officer for the Missouri Pacific Railroad, and the wounding of Charles Pratt. Phillips County white deputies sheriff. So, the next morning, the Phillips County sheriff sent a posse to arrest the suspect and the people involved in the shooting. And although the posse encountered minimal resistance from the black residents of the area in Elaine, the fear of African Americans who outnumbered the whites in the area of Phillips County by the ratio 10 to 1 led an enormous 500,000 armed white people. Mostly, too, from the surrounding Arkansas counties, but also from across the Mississippi, to travel to Elaine to characterize them by insurrection. And on October 1st, Phillips County authorities sent 3 telegrams to Governor Bro requesting that the U.S. troops be sent to Elaine. And Bro responded by gaining permission from the Department of War to send more than 500 battle-tested troops from Camp Pike outside of Little Rock. So, after the troops would arrive in Elaine on the morning of October 2nd, the white mobs would begin to depart from their homes, and the military placed several hundred African Americans in makeshift stockades until they could be questioned and vouched for their white employers. So, and the violence even claimed those who had nothing to do with the Union efforts, such as brothers David Augustine L.U. Johnston, Gibson Allen Johnston, Lewis Harrison, and Leroy Johnston, who were returning to Helena from a hunting trip when they were attacked and killed on October 2nd. So, evidence would eventually show that the mobs of the whites slaughtered African Americans in and around the Elaine. For example, H.F. Smitty swore in an eyewitness account in 1921 that several hundred men began to hunt Negroes and shooting them as they came down. And interestingly, there was even suggested that troops from Camp Pike engaged in indiscriminate killing of African Americans in the area. If this is true, there was a replication of the militia activity that was conveyed in the revolts. In 1925, Sharp Dunaway would allege that soldiers of Elaine had committed one murder after another and claimed liberation in the world. Either too heartless to realize the enormity of their crimes or too drunk on moonshine to give sentimental darn. So, now, Colonel Isaac Jinks, who was the commander of the U.S. troops in Elaine, reported a number of African Americans killed by the U.S. troops, as well. Now, in contrast, the correspondent of the Memphis Press would write that many Negroes were reportedly killed by the soldiers, and one anecdotal information suggests that the U.S. troops may engage in the torture of African Americans to make sure they confess to give information. Now, the right power structure in Phillips County formed a committee of seven made of influential leaders, businessmen, and elected officials to investigate the cause of disturbance. The committee met with Governor Bro, who had hidden on the ground, and the troops were accompanying them on the march to the Hooksboro area, and the governor, who had reported as saying was going to Elaine to obtain correct information, and accepted the authority of the committee to return for the commitment that there was no lynchings to take place in Helena. He would return to Little Rock the next day in a press conference as well. Now, from this point forward, there have been two versions of what occurred in Elaine. Now, the white leaders put forward a view that black residents had been about the revolt. Um, and E.M. Allen, who was a planter and real estate developer, who had become a spokesperson for Phillips County white power structure, told the Helena report that the present troubles with the Negroes in Phillips County is not a race riot. It is a deliberately planned insurrection of the Negroes against the erected organization of progressive forms. Now, on the other hand, though, the National Association of Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, in New York, which sent Phil's secretary Walter White to investigate the events, contested at the allegations from the outset. White wrote that Chicago News that there was a belief of insurrection only in a figment of the imagination of Arkansas whites, not based on fact. So, within days of the initial shootout, 285 African Americans have been taken from the temporary stockades to the jail. Stockades to the jail and everything. And in 1921, they committed acts of torture on Phillips County Jail at the name, and they had also participated in the torture. And also on October 31st, 1919, the Phillips County grand jury charged 122 African Americans with crimes stemming from racial disturbances to the chances of murder, from murder to night riding. A charge of Aiken for a terroristic threatening to define the Act 112 in 1909. The trials would take place the next week, and John Elvis Miller leading the prosecution, while attorney from Helena would appoint Circuit Judge J.M. Jackson to represent 12 black men to go on trial. And attorney Jacob Fink, who sought his appointed who appointed to represent him, admitted to the jury that there had not been any witnesses, and he had no motion for a charge to the venue and challenge a single prospective juror, taking the first 12 called. Now, by November 5th, 1919, the first 12 black men were given trials and have been convicted and sentenced to die in a electric chair. As a result, 65 others quickly did plea bargains and accepted sentences up to 21 years for second-degree murders. Now, others had their charges dismissed. Now, in Little Rock, the headquarters of the NAACP of New York, also efforts began to fight the death sentence and hand it down to Helena. And it led to by Scipio Africanus Jones and led the black attorney in his era to Arkansas by Edgar L. Mahaney and began to raise money for the black communities in Little Rock in defense of the Elaine 12. As convicted men came to be known, those 12 men were Frank Moore, Frank Hicks, Ed Hicks, Joe Knox, Paul Hall, Ed Coleman, Alfred Banks, Ed Ware, William Wardlow, Albert Gills, Joe Fox, and John Martin. But at the same time, the New York offices of the NAACP, upon the advice of the Arkansas attorney, hired the Little Rock law firm George Murphy, a former attorney general and a candidate for the governor, as a counsel for the 12 men, even at the age of 79. So, and the convictions for the other six, okay, and they secured new trials for 6 of the men, known as the Ware defendants, based on the fact that the trial judge had not required jurors to indicate the degree of murder on the ballot, and the convictions of the other 6 men and defendants were affirmed. Now, it's important to note that the cases of the Elaine 12 were litigated on 2 separate tracks. The retrials of the Ware began on March 3rd, 1920, and during the trials, Murphy became ill and Jones became the principal counsel. Hostility later toward him was the fact of a local white resident, to hear him out. So, the Morris defendants were granted a new hearing in the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of Moore versus Dempsey, ruled the original proceeding in Helena had been a quote mask, and that unquote, and that the state of Arkansas had not provided a corrected process that would have allowed the defendants to vindicate the constitutional right to due process of law. Instead, a new hearing in federal court in March 1923, Sipico Jones entered a negotiation to have more defendants released. To be released, the men would have a sentence of 5 years, would have to plead guilty to second-degree murder, and um, for a sentence of 5 years from the date they were first incarcerated in the Arkansas State Pen. And finally, on January 14, 1925, Governor Thomas McRae ordered the release of the Moore defendants by granting them infinite furloughs after they had pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In the interim, Jones had secured the release of the other Elaine defendants as well. So, through some local white residents of Phillips County still contend that the white people of the time acted appropriately to prevent the slaughter of Elaine in the area. In 1919, in the modern view of most historians of the crisis, is that the white mobs unjustly killed and undermined in numbers of African Americans. More controversial than is the view that the military participated in the murder of the black and of the African Americans, and race relations in the area of Arkansas is currently quite strained from a number of reasons, including the events of 1919 as well. But that is it for this episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day and try and stay cool. I know it's hot right now.